Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Dennehy, Director of Programs and Lead Teacher at Shanthi Project. Some of you, I can't see you, but some of you may know me from, I may have been in your classroom before. If so, hello. And if not, it's nice to meet you. So this is my second official presentation where I'm just staring at myself, so I'm used to it. And just a little bit more about me. I'm also a yoga teacher and a licensed behavioral specialist. I've been doing that for over 10 years. I've been in the autism field for almost 20 years. It's a little bit about me, and here is what we are doing today. So we're going to cover just briefly what is mindfulness. We're going to talk about why we are bringing mindfulness into schools, into the classroom. And then we're going to spend a little time talking about how you can bring mindfulness into your classroom. So let's get started. Of course, there's a garbage truck outside my house right now, so it's super loud. I hope you can't hear it. All right, so let's start off with the what. What is mindfulness? And we're going to start off with the kind of official definition of mindfulness from the person they call the father of mindfulness, Jon Kabat-Zinn. Mindfulness is thousands of years old, but Jon Kabat-Zinn was actually the person who kind of brought it into our Western culture in the late 70s with a program he developed called mindfulness-based stress reduction. So his definition is that mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, and that way is on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So let's unpack kind of what that means. So we'll use the example of the clouds. If I'm deciding that I'm going to mindfully watch the clouds. So my intent is to, in this moment, just focus on clouds. So I'm looking at the shapes and how they're drifting around in the sky. The non-judgmentally part means I'm not going to attach anything to just this moment of looking at clouds. So if I'm looking at the clouds, I see that cloud is dark. So then I start thinking, oh, is it going to rain? And, you know, if it rains later, it's going to ruin my plans. You know, it's going to do something outside. And, you know, why does it always rain when I want to, you know, when I have plans? So now I'm out of the moment. I'm in the future worrying about something that might happen. I've attached all these feelings and thoughts to that cloud instead of just, oh, that cloud is a little dark, it's shifting, it's changing, and it's moving through the sky. All right, so let's talk about what and we're gonna talk a little bit more, I'll show you a video in just a second about a little bit more about what mindfulness is, but let's talk about what mindfulness is not. So just a quick, a lot of people wonder, you know, are mindfulness and meditation the same thing? And they are not. I think of mindfulness as more of a way of life. You can live mindfully. You can just kind of insert mindfulness into your day every day. And meditation is more of an action. It's something that you can choose to do. You might do a mindfulness meditation, so it's more of an action than, you know, just a way of being. So mindfulness is not about meditating for hours. You can absolutely meditate as part of your mindfulness practice, and you choose, you know, what makes the most sense for you and your situation and your environment, etc. So your meditation practice might be, you know, 15 minutes twice a day. It might be 5 minutes in the morning, you know, whatever works best for you. If you want to meditate for hours, excellent. Mindfulness is not about emptying the mind. That's impossible. It's really about just sort of calming the mind. We have tens of thousands of thoughts every single day. That is quite a lot going on, and mindfulness is really just about pausing and just kind of focusing, and that focus, whether you're focusing, you know, on one of the senses, what you're seeing, you know, watching the clouds or just listening to the sounds around you, you're just slowing down, calming down the mind. It's not completely empty. You're still going to have thoughts going through your head, and you're still going to lose focus. And then you'll realize, oh, I'm supposed to be watching clouds, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner. So, and I'm sure your minds have wandered, you know, in just a few minutes since I started talking, and that's completely fine. We're all human, and that happens. As soon as you realize that that your mind has wandered, you are back in the present moment and you are being mindful. So congratulate yourself for noticing. And then you just come back to focusing. When you lose track again, you come back again. Mindfulness is not about being happy all the time. You know, if you practice mindfulness, you don't walk around with this, you know, perma grin and, you know, feeling calm and wonderful. You know, if the definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the moment, there are moments that I'm feeling upset. There are moments that I'm in physical pain. So, you know, it doesn't mean that every moment is going to be wonderful. However, I find with practicing mindfulness that you start to notice all, you know, these little good things that happen throughout the day. As humans, we are literally conditioned to focus more on the bad stuff, on the negative stuff. That's part of our survival instinct. But with mindfulness, we start noticing the good stuff, and that kind of, you know, when we notice a few good things, we notice more and more good things, and it's kind of a nice experience, and you start to notice, you know, a lot more good stuff. Mindfulness is not time consuming. Like I mentioned, we're kind of inserting a mindfulness throughout the day. So it can just be moments throughout the day. But the more you practice, it almost becomes more automatic for you. And it's not difficult. It doesn't take years of study and certifications and, you know, hours and hours of reading. Once you kind of get the hang of it and you start practicing it, you'll find that it's actually quite simple. Benefits of mindfulness, we'll just kind of go through this quickly. So a lot of research has been done on mindfulness, and so, you know, this is science-based. Mindfulness does reduce anxiety and stress levels. You know, there's actual chemical reactions going on when we get stressed out. We're releasing cortisol, you know, stress hormone, and when we're mindful, when we take mindful breaths, we're actually activating the part of our nervous system that you know, helps us rest and feel calm. You know, and that is going to improve our physical health. You know, stress is at the root of a lot of disease. So if we are aware of that stress and we're doing what we can to minimize it, to work through it, then, you know, it could improve our physical health as well. Mindfulness can enhance self-esteem, self-awareness, self-confidence, all the selves, and can result in increased compassion. We're better able to focus and pay attention, empathize with others, and just generally feel calm. So I have a little video for you. You might have seen this before. It's just a really great, concise definition of, you know, what mindfulness is. And the narrator of this is Dan Harris. He is an anchor for ABC News, and he actually had a panic attack while he was live on air reading the news. And after that panic attack, he kind of, you know, did a little research and self-reflection, and, you know, and discovered mindfulness. And he's a self-proclaimed skeptic, but he has since gone on to write books and has a mindfulness podcast called 10% Happier. I've seen this video you know, hundreds of times, but but I love it each time.
Sarah, we're not able to, I can't hear your screen. I think we might have to go back and do that button again. We'll take care of the sound.
Sorry, guys.
You would think that would stick with it. No worries.
Tell me again where that, I found it.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. Let's start over. Just, Jen.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribes for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
Okay. I really like that what he says at the end. Mindfulness isn't going to solve all your problems. You're still gonna, it's not going to make your stress completely go away. You need that stress, and you know it's going to come up for you. But it just, mindfulness will help you respond to those stressors better, as opposed to just reacting. All right, so why are we teaching mindfulness in schools? Oh, Jen, can you give out that poll? I forgot again.
Yep, I'll do that.
Okay,
now.
so we're just gonna ask how many of you have already experienced mindfulness in your classroom. And I think while you guys are answering that, I'll just get started talking about it. Just real quick, I don't want to dwell too much on the program, but this is what our in-class mindfulness program looks like. It's 16 lessons over 8 weeks, so we're in your classroom twice a week for about 20 minutes at a time. We work with the students as well as the teacher, and you know, it's really helpful to have the teacher as involved as possible. There's a lot more buy-in from the kids when the teacher's involved. We start off with just the definition of mindfulness, in kids' terms, and, telling them why we're here, what to expect. Oh, okay. Interesting. So 37% of you have had it so far. Okay. All right. Thank you for participating. Okay. So we define it for them. We explain why we're here and how mindfulness can be beneficial. And we teach, basic foundational mindfulness skills like mindful listening, mindful breathing. And then we build off of those, and we talk about kindness, and gratitude, feelings, super important. We're teaching, the kids how to become, a lot more self-aware. And we're also teaching them about their brains, and which I think is super empowering for kids to understand when I'm having a big feeling, why do I react the way I do? Well, that's how your brain is designed. And, kind of lets them know this happens to all of us. It's not, you're not bad. This is your brain's survival mode. And here's a superpower, that you can use to get control back when, that part of your brain just kind of takes over. And our curriculum is from Mindful Schools. That's also where all of our instructors get their certifications. And we also have borrowed from the Mind Up curriculum, which is a very science-based mindfulness curriculum from California. Okay, so Shanthi Project is a trauma-informed organization, and we actually offer to the community an annual trauma-informed training, and all of our teachers have obviously taken that training. So when we come into your classroom, we're coming in with that lens, and that's the language that we'll use. We don't expect, we're not coming in like, okay, everyone's participating, I'm not getting started until you're all listening. We use invitatory language, giving choices. For instance, we do a mindful minute, usually at the beginning of each class. And, we'll start off by inviting kids, if you can close your eyes if you want. If that doesn't feel good, then maybe just kind of turn your eyes down so you're looking down at your lap. So we'll teach them how to soften their gaze instead. And then during that mindful minute, it's literally a minute of silence. That can feel really relaxing to some, and it can be very scary to others, and we understand that. So, I'll give the kids a choice. You can, during that mindful minute, you can just focus on your breath, which again might feel good for some and scary for others. Or you can choose to do mindful listening, which just means you're listening to the sounds around you, and that can feel a little bit safer for other kids. So this past school year, I had a child in another district who she was a first grader, and she was able to verbalize to her teacher, after a couple lessons, like she really didn't like doing that mindful minute, and she was having some trouble with mindfulness overall. She's having a lot of issues at home, and she recognized, that this wasn't a good feeling. So, the three of us talked, and the little girl was okay with doing coloring. She sat in the back, she sat near the teacher where she felt safe, and she would color and draw during mindfulness, which didn't mean that she wasn't paying attention. The teacher said that, she saw this child using breathing techniques, and talking about the things that we had learned, but this was just a way for her to feel safe during mindfulness. So, luckily she was able to verbalize that, but not every kid is able to. They might not really understand how they're feeling. They might be afraid to say it, so they're going to say it in different ways, with their body language. We get a lot of like, kids, I'm not doing this. eye rolls and stuff like that, or tapping pencils during the quiet minute or something like that, which is fine. And it could take a while to build up trust, because here's this strange lady suddenly in my classroom twice a week talking about something that I don't fully understand, and I don't really like it. So, we might earn their trust by like week 6 or 7, or we might not earn it at all. And we recognize that. So we're kind of, always paying attention to who might be experiencing, not such a great, who may be not having such a great experience right now. And just real quick, the picture I chose on this slide is because this happens in every single school I've been to. On the first day, I'll ask, do you know why I'm here? Do you know what mindfulness is? What is mindfulness? And inevitably, someone, sits up cross-legged with their hands resting on their knees and starts oming. All right, so let's talk about, that's our traditional in-class mindfulness program, but we might be moving into a not so traditional fall. So we're working on, how can we deliver this programming in, using different modalities. So when schools closed in March, we were lucky enough, our funders were asked us if we could put our program online. So, we struggled with this because it's important to have that back and forth, to have that engagement and a lot of discussion with the kids and the teachers. So we came up with an 8-lesson program that included, and some of you may have seen this, it was shared with all the schools. It was an 8-lesson program that included a video instruction component, so whatever the topic of the day was, and also mindful movement. That's something that we incorporate in our programs in person, so we definitely wanted to keep that. So another video of mindful movement. And then another component, it's either an art project, a game, an activity, some of it on video that kids could do that was also supplemental to the program. So while we were doing this, there were other organizations around the Lehigh Valley that were also, responding with their own materials, resources, lesson plans, and so we all ended up collaborating. Resilient Lehigh Valley, United Way, Lehigh University, IU's 20 and 21, and there's Wildlands Conservancy. We all decided to collaborate and put it all on one platform that we call Creating Calm Together. And again, you may have seen that. We will include, that link is included in both my presentation and Brooke's presentation coming up next. And you'll all have access to that if you haven't seen it already. So moving into the school year, we are looking at, again, video component, supplemental materials, teacher guides, and hopefully, if we can't be in the classroom, hopefully some type of live stream, where we can come in from time to time. So back to why are we teaching mindfulness in schools? Mindfulness helps kids to pay attention and to focus, which can be really helpful in school. So they're constantly told to pay attention, and mindfulness can actually teach them how to do that. And we're also really building self-awareness. So we want them to notice their feelings as they're having them, not just pushing away uncomfortableness. Notice their thoughts, recognize their basic needs, instead of just holding all that in and then, exploding later, reacting. we're teaching them to notice what's going on, and then, have the ability to respond to that, to verbalize your needs, or, whatever it is that you need to do. We're teaching that self-awareness is that first step. So clearly, and I'm sure that you've been talking about this a lot since we realized that schools weren't going to be opening again for the rest of the year. There is a lot going on out there. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's a very stressful time. That we've been dealing with this with the pandemic, and then in the last few weeks, so much unrest and stress and sadness, and if kids are watching the news or just hearing snippets of conversations, it's scary, it's confusing. They're all going through this, but at the same time, all the adults are going through it. So, we're usually the rock, but here we're all shaken up too. So, obviously a very stressful time. And on top of that, hopefully kids will be coming back to a physical school, but regardless, they'll be coming back to something, and they've been out of, a physical school environment for at least 6 months. And so there's going to be a lot of, they're coming in with a lot. Again, I'm sure you've been talking about that, but let's talk about, trauma. So some of our kids who were already coming from a more traumatic environment, they had school to go to every day. 5 days a week, they were able to get support and love and structure and food, and have their basic needs met. And suddenly they're not able to come to school anymore. They're, if that was their safe haven, that's gone now. And on top of that, maybe there's physical, emotional, verbal abuse going on in the home. With everything that's going on, unemployment, where are we getting, our next meal from? That's probably making a bad situation much worse, unfortunately. And then there are kids who may, have been doing okay, may have been doing fine, and they're going to look a lot different. They've been going through a lot over the last 6 months, and who knows, how all of this has affected them. So, kids will be coming to us with a lot. So you've probably seen this hierarchy of learning pyramid before. So up at the top of the pyramid, that's where we do our best learning. That, once our needs have been met, then we're motivated. We have our creativity, our ability to learn and problem solve, all that good stuff that leads to just a great learning environment. But right now, that our that solid base is not, maybe not so solid anymore. And these are the things that we're going to have to really pay attention to more than ever. And that's where mindfulness comes in. This is helping kids understand these feelings, be aware of these feelings, giving them the tools to be able to work through this, being there, we're all in this together, but, working through it together. Just real quick, this is a letter that I got. We get a lot of, cards and stuff, but this one has always really touched me. I got this a couple years ago from a 5th grader. She was very quiet, didn't participate much. On my last day there, she kind of, just snuck this into my hand. It says, "Thank you so much, because if it wasn't for you, there would be a bunch of holes in my house, but you taught me to breathe and name it to tame it, and it helps so much. So thank you." So, true pictures of kind of, what's going on at home. And, I'm thinking that a bunch of holes in my house is kind of literal and figurative. So, it makes a huge difference. It definitely helps. And even when we think we might not be reaching kids, we really are. Okay, so let's move on to the how. How can I insert mindfulness into my day? So it can feel a little overwhelming. Maybe you've tried it before, it didn't work, you feel like there's not enough time, and absolutely academics are super important, but just knowing that these mindfulness skills are also imperative to future success. But still, we have to pack so much into our day. It can feel very daunting, and maybe you're thinking, well, I don't have a practice. So I'm here to encourage you to start a practice, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So it really comes down to presence and practices. Your presence, the environment you're creating, and the whole class is creating, and also the practices. So Brooke, in a few minutes, will be talking about self-care and self-compassion. So I'll let her tackle that. So it's important to know your own triggers. So is there a certain time of day or certain students that kind of trigger you, that like get you frustrated? Being aware that that's coming, being aware of it ahead of time, kind of having a plan in place for little changes that you can make to respond to when those triggers are activated. And then modeling, super important. Kids look to us to know how to be in the world. So, don't be afraid to narrate your feelings. So, hey guys, a minute ago, I was super frustrated and I was about to yell. So I walked over to my desk, I took a few breaths, cleared my mind. And, now let's talk about this. And, instead of me yelling at you, or, if you did yell, then, just, hey, like, I just lost my cool there. I wasn't paying attention to how I felt, and then I just started yelling. And next time I'm going to take a breath, and because I don't like yelling, and I don't want to yell. Just being open with them. From time to time, maybe set a little alarm or something, and just check in with yourself. Pause. Just notice how you're doing. Notice the thoughts that are in your head or how you're feeling, and just take a breath. Ask yourself, is there anything I need right now in this moment? So creating a safe space, whether that's in your physical classroom or virtually, you probably already do this at the beginning of the year, but really collaborating with your class, like, hey, this is our class for this year. It's our classroom, it's our space together. So let's collaborate. What do we want? What would make this space safe for us? Thinking about how you want to feel when you're in school, when you walk into your classroom, and then how can we ensure that we're making this space as welcoming and as safe as possible for everybody. And also a calming corner. I know a lot of you already have a corner of your classroom, full of things that kids can manipulate, or just things to help them, maybe little visuals of breaths they can take, and this is wonderful. So creating that together, like, what helps you calm down? Having that discussion. Okay, let's incorporate that into the calming corner, and here are the expectations of that corner. And then maybe encouraging, if they are at home, if this is an online classroom and they're at home, then just finding a space. It doesn't have to be this really cool, full of gadgets area in their house. It might just be a chair or a corner of a room where they know that that's where they can go when they just need to center themselves or take a break or calm down. So encouraging that. And by doing all of this, you're really creating a shared language in the classroom. So let's talk about practices. One of the simplest things you can do is facilitate a mindful minute or 2 or 3 throughout the day. So you're starting to create routines. A mindful minute is simply you ring a chime. It can be an actual chime. It can be an app, just a sound, and then just sit for a minute. Invite the kids to either breathe mindfully, focus on the breath or focus on sounds that they hear, but it's just sitting for a minute. And then noticing how they feel after that mindful minute. You can do it at the beginning of the day, after everyone hangs up their stuff, gets to their seat, maybe right after lunch or recess, and then maybe again toward the end of the day before they head home. If you like, you can choose, you can have a mindful leader in your classroom. So maybe a mindful leader, different one each day, or they're the mindful leader for the whole week. But they would be in charge of maybe ringing the chime for the mindful minutes, maybe leading, choosing what kind of mindful movement we're going to do, or what our mindful break is going to be. I would also encourage check-ins, and that's similar to what I mentioned on the previous slide. It's just that pause, notice, and breathe. So, even if it's just a quiet time in the classroom, hey, let's put down our pencils and just kind of check in with ourselves. What thoughts are going through your head? How are you feeling? Is there anything you need right now? Just notice what's happening. We're building that self-awareness. During transitions, you can get creative. All right, so, let's line up, but let's be so quiet that if the principal was in this room and her eyes were closed, she wouldn't even notice that there were people in here. That's how quiet we're going to do it. Or, as we walk down the hall, as we're walking, see how many green things you can find. Keep it in your head. And when we get back to the classroom, you can tell me all the green things that you saw. So, things like that. With older kids, you could even have, if you have 24 students, you could have numbers 1 to 24 and pass out a number to everyone, face down. And then when it's time to line up, they check their number. They can't say a word. They have to, line up in numerical order without talking to each other, figure out how they're going to do that. So different ways you can, again, we're just inserting mindfulness into the day. Mindful movement. So I know a lot of you already do this. So just get up, stretch, shake it out, shake your hands, shake your legs, a quick Simon Says kind of game, something like that. Highlighting kindness. So maybe you have a kindness bulletin board and kids, fill out a Post-it when they notice a kind action in the classroom, or maybe it's something they saw somewhere else in the school, or it happened, outside of school. Or maybe you just talk about it, with younger kids, you talk about it during your morning meeting and, add something to your kindness bulletin board. Same with gratitude, taking a gratitude break every once in a while where everyone just stops. Hey, think of 3 things that you're thankful for. Just keep them in your head and then just notice how you feel. Gratitude practice, very strong. So these are just different ways, fun, creative things, just let your imagination go. You can do mindful breaks, maybe you have cards and the mindful leader picks a card, and maybe the mindful break is doing a quick rainbow scavenger hunt. Find something that's red, orange, yellow, green, etc. Maybe it's really quick, like let's just pause and just notice our feet. Without moving them, just notice them. Maybe look around the room and find 6 purple things. So just very simple, breaks throughout the day. Take a minute, 30 seconds, 5 minutes at the most. And all these moments really add up to a mindful classroom. One of my favorite quotes, your child is not giving you a hard time, your child is having a hard time. And just know that kids right now are having a really hard time. We're all having a hard time, and we're going to show that we're having a hard time with our behavior. Before I go, here are some tips to starting your own practice, which I know you're all excited to do now. So start off small. Just first make a commitment. You know what? I've been reading about mindfulness. I've been hearing about it constantly. You know what? I'm going to start my own practice. So just make that commitment to yourself, and then start small. Don't do all the things, because then you'll kind of burn out. But start creating your own routines, in your life, and then think about what you can translate into the classroom. And starting day one on the first day of school is probably a great way to start. But again, starting small. What resonates with you? Maybe set an intention. An intention is just a statement of how you maybe want your day to go, or how you want your classroom to be, or your life. Today I am calm, I am patient. And then just kind of check in with yourself. Am I aligning with my intention? Let go of expectations. You're not going to have this perfect, harmonious, happy, calm classroom at all times, but you will see changes. One thing I didn't mention, in our own research, Shanthi Project has shown that there are increased teaching minutes throughout the day when mindfulness is used in the classroom. So you're actually gaining time by practicing mindfulness. So with that extra time that you have, you can just insert all these little things. So back to your own practice, there are lots of great apps out there: Insight Timer, Calm, Stop, Breathe, and Think. A lot of these have free components, and then a lot of them are subscription, but they give them away free to teachers, so definitely look into that. And last but not least, this is actually I think if you're just going to do one thing, do this. Start a gratitude practice. And very simple. You can have a journal, or you can just do it in your head and scraps of paper. Just think of at least 3 things from your day. I usually do this at the end of the day, right before bed. 3 things that I am grateful for from today. And then notice how you feel. Just notice how thinking about those wonderful things in your day, how it makes you feel. It's a very strong practice. So this is how this is our website, this is how you can reach us, and this is the Creating Calm Together website. So you'll get these slides, so you'll get all of this information, and also some recommended reading for you. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. Brooke will take over from here to talk a little bit about self-care and vicarious trauma.
Great, thanks so much, Jen and Sarah. So I'm just going to start off by introducing myself. My name is Brooke Kohler, and like Sarah mentioned, we can't see you all, but if I know you, it's nice to see you, and if not, it's nice to virtually meet you and connect. I have been a teacher for Shanthi Project, as well as a former director. Currently, I'm a doctoral student at Lehigh University's College of Education, where I'm in the Counseling Psychology Department, as well as the Gender-Based Inclusion and Trauma Lab. And my research focus is integrating trauma-informed approaches into schools, and specifically within elementary and secondary schools. Within both of my roles, through Shanthi Project and the College of Education, I've had the opportunity to work with numerous schools throughout the Lehigh Valley. So I'm really excited to be here with you all from BASD today, and we'll get started. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. Okay. And like Jen mentioned, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about self-care and vicarious trauma. And if those are new words for you, we're going to talk about that as well. So just some things that we're going to talk a little bit about this afternoon is these terms of vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, teacher burnout. We're going to learn a little bit about what they mean. And we're also going to reflect on what things like self-care, strengths, and growth edges mean for us. So where are some areas that we're doing strength care or self-care really well, and some places that we can use a little bit of improvement. And then lastly, we're going to talk about different self-care strategies and how they can be applied in educational settings. So the first thing we're going to do is just watch a little video about teacher burnout. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to reshare it, but with a different video. So just hang with me for one moment, please. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure you all can hear.
Schools are stressful. I mean, there's a lot going on, the demands of a teacher these days. As a leader, I'm very aware of, the threshold, that breaking point, the burnouts, and, the sustainability of a teacher it's very delicate.
Education as a profession is basically the only social service that doesn't require, as part of its credentialing or ongoing credentialing process, some sort of way to process stress and trauma. Most police, fire, EMT agencies, if there's a death or a major traumatic event, they're at least required to do a couple hours of therapy to jump back on their rigs or get their gun and their badge back. Educators are expected to go for as long as 30 or 35 years with absolutely nothing to help us process stress and trauma. And we hold a lot of vicarious trauma for the students and families that we serve.
What's burnout? It's inability to deal with the stress. There's a tolerance level that's been exceeded. They're dealing with all the forces that work in a public school. It's a lot of stress, anxiety, and chaos that's coming at them, a lot of energy coming at them every day. And I think mindfulness gives us a force field that helps them take that in, but not let it affect them in a negative way. It helps them deal with it in a more healthy and kind of patient manner.
I'm just going to reshare my slides. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick poll with everybody on the webinar right now. So Jen, if you could help assist with that. So kind of reflecting a little bit on that video, have you ever experienced teacher burnout? And the poll answers are yes, no, or not sure.
I'm looking for that narrative now. It doesn't seem to have saved on my, oh, hold on. Here we go. All right, you guys should see that now. I really like how one of the speakers on that video, Brooke, talked about mindfulness being a force field, like a protective force field around a teacher to deal with so many of their daily stresses, that a lot of things that we as educators don't have control over, but that self-care and mindfulness is something that teachers can control. And it certainly gives them that force field. I love that analogy.
Yes, another analogy I think of is if you go to a bowling alley and the bowling alley has the bumpers on the side. I also think of mindfulness kind of like those extra bumpers to make sure the bowling ball gets all the way down to the pins.
All right. About 90% voting, so I'm going to go ahead and end it. And I don't think we'll be surprised by the results.
Yep. Yeah, so it says about 75% of you have shared that you think you've experienced teacher burnout. About 13% said no, and about 13% were unsure. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that means, and some solutions of how maybe self-care can help alleviate some of that teacher burnout that you've shared with us today. So just some terms that we can think about and talk about when we're thinking about things like teacher burnout. The first one is this idea of compassion fatigue, and that STS next to it, it might also be known as secondary traumatic stress. So compassion fatigue is a compromised capacity for empathy. And you might think of this when you are empathizing with so many of your students, you are working with them throughout the entire day, and you get to a certain point where that fatigue kind of just levels out and there's almost none left to give. You can think of the analogy of just having a cup of water, and if you're giving out sips of water to everyone, eventually there's not going to be any water left in the cup. And we notice this not only within our classroom environment, but when we get home and into our other areas of life as well. So you might have been able to empathize and share compassion with all of your students, and then by the time you get home with your partner or your family, if your kids ask you for something, you're just totally done. This might also be for yourself as well. So you might have shared that empathy and compassion with so many other people that you might not be willing to share that compassion toward yourself. And there might be some of that negative self-talk or thoughts or behaviors that we notice as a result of compassion fatigue. We talked a little bit about this, and we saw it in the video, talking about burnout. And specifically, we can think of burnout with 3 different components. One being overwhelming exhaustion, another being this idea of detachment and cynicism, and then thirdly, a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. So for you who identified that you have experienced teacher burnout, I've felt burnout myself, and I think all of those things that I want to get done, I just can't get done. It's kind of that perpetual feeling behind. And so these 2 different terms are a little bit different from vicarious or secondary trauma. And so vicarious trauma is almost like this emotional residue that kind of lasts from working with students or working with people who have experienced trauma or adverse childhood experiences themselves. So it's kind of almost, especially when we're working with students and with multiple students who have experienced this type of trauma, we begin to kind of take on that trauma that is being shared out. And this is something that really can stick with us and impact us in different ways. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what this vicarious trauma might feel like for us. So this is an image from Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky's book, Trauma Stewardship. It's an image of a trauma exposure response. And what you might see are there's a number of different experiences that we might each feel individually when we're experiencing vicarious trauma. For each of us, it's going to look a little bit different. I'm not saying that you have to feel all of these things to be experiencing vicarious trauma. You might feel 1, 2, 5 of them. It's going to be a little bit different for each individual. One being feeling helpless and hopeless. So we might feel like everything going on in the world is happening. There's nothing we can do to stop it, and it's just a force that keeps continuing. A second one is a sense that one can never do enough. That's kind of like what we were talking about before, of that feeling of ineffectiveness and a lack of accomplishment. Hypervigilance. The third is one that I personally notice when I experience vicarious trauma. So if I'm working with students and I feel that kind of vicarious trauma, I notice I carry it with me when I go home. So it's the very last thing I'm thinking about when I'm going to bed. And it's the very first thing I'm thinking of when I wake up and I'm still laying in bed in the morning. And it's kind of this, I feel it as like a very kind of awake energy within myself. Another one we might notice is diminished creativity. So you might not be interested in those creative spaces that you often enjoyed in the past. You might notice your inability to embrace complexity. So you might have a little bit more of that black and white thinking, a yes or no mindset. We might minimize things as less than they actually are. You might feel chronically exhausted or have physical ailments. So noticing those things like tense shoulders or tension headaches. maybe for me personally, like I feel stress in my stomach. So that could be another one for you. You may also notice an inability to listen or deliberate avoidance. So you're intentionally choosing not to listen or, again, empathize with other people. You may even have dissociative moments. So there might be those instances when you're driving home from school and all of a sudden you're at home and you don't know how you got there. Your mind kind of checked out or went on autopilot. There's a sense of persecution we might feel, feelings of guilt and fear. We might notice things like anger and cynicism, as well as the inability to empathize or numb. So again, we're kind of tuning ourselves out from that feeling because we've been so overwhelmed. You might also notice things like addictions. And then lastly, grandiosity or an inflated sense of importance related to one's work. And this is one that I sometimes take on as well. So you feel like you are the only person who can do this job and you are the one responsible, you are the one that has to do it. So nobody else can do this, this is you. And these might be some different experiences we notice when we're actually taking on that trauma of others through vicarious trauma. So I'm just gonna take a moment. I'll take a sip of water, and if you all have your notebook or if you have your notes out on your computer, you might just take a moment and look at this, these different experiences we have, and reflect for yourself. What are some of your personal stress responses, and what are maybe some of your responses to vicarious trauma? And if this is something you would like to continue as a practice for yourself, we are sharing all of the slides as well. And you can also, you can see I have a little link down here for trauma stewardship. Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky does a really wonderful TED Talk where she talks a little bit more in detail about each of these different experiences. So you're welcome to check that out after the talk. So what we want to think about in terms of burnout, vicarious trauma, and our roles as educators is how this stress and trauma and vicarious trauma relates to educator responsiveness. So what we know is that teachers who report increased stress are more likely to utilize punitive, reactive, and exclusionary discipline practices for student misconduct at the expense of being responsive to student needs. So we can think about this when we're at home and say we're stressed out at home. We may be a little bit more snappy with our partner. We may not want to deal with our kids. And these same kind of ideas translate into the classroom. So if we're just feeling more stressed in general, we may be a little bit more black and white thinking to the complex questions our kids are asking. We may not want to deal with certain students or certain behaviors. We have a little bit lower tolerance. And what begins to happen is there's this kind of cyclical nature with this stress. So if our students are stressed, their stress, we might kind of take that on, right, in that vicarious space. Then we begin to feel stressed. And then our stress gets projected back onto our students. And then the students get more stressed and it comes back to the teachers. And so it keeps going and going and going. And so what we can do is really begin to prioritize and think about our teacher well-being. And when we think about teacher well-being, self-care is one of those first ways that we can really begin to take care of ourselves and stop that cyclical process. Importantly, in addition to that, is that we can model this type of self-care for our students. So not only are we taking care of ourselves, but we're modeling to our students on how they can take care of themselves as well. So to prevent and alleviate some of this vicarious trauma and stress that we experience, we can find self-care. And the definition of self-care is a daily process of being aware of and attending to one's basic physiological and emotional needs. And this includes shaping of one's daily routine, relationships, and environments. And research has shown that working alongside and using self-care is associated with positive physical health, emotional well-being, and mental health. And it's also a protective factor against things like mental health symptoms, job and school burnout, as well as improving work and school productivity. So when we think about this, some things we might want to think about at an individual level, at a school level, a grade level, a district level even, is what are the things that we're already doing that are really strong? And what are the things that we can consider as successes in the ways that we already utilize self-care? Like Sarah mentioned before, maybe you already have some peace corners. Maybe you all take a mindful moment when you begin the school day. So we can think about these things that we're doing and build upon them. On the flip side of that, we can also think about what are some of our growth edges or areas that we can expand and grow upon our self-care. Maybe as you're listening to this talk, you're thinking in your head, you're probably laughing in your head saying, ha, I don't have self-care. I don't have time for that. My school doesn't have time for that. We don't do that. And that's okay too, because we're all experiencing these different areas of self-care at different moments. So if there are some areas where you feel like you can grow, or maybe begin to think about how can I integrate self-care into my teaching space, my educating space, or my personal space, you can do this as well as a reflection practice. And then additionally, we want to think about how to support ourselves first and foremost, but we can also think about how we want to lift each other up in terms of self-care and how we can support each other and again, model that self-care for one another. And I'll put a little note here for COVID-19, especially because we also need to think about how we're all dealing with stress in this really challenging and uncertain time. One thing that we might think about is when we're going back to the fall. One is we don't know what that's going to look like. So for some folks, it might be different than for others. And two, our students who have been at home are all having really different experiences of their own types of stress, as Sarah mentioned before. So you might have students who coming into the fall or teaching in the fall, they might have experienced additional trauma or stress while they've been at home. And those students who you've been working with really well are all of a sudden a few steps back. You might also see students who were really good and really working hard and in the space they needed to be. And now those students are also a few steps back. On the flip side, you might also have students who are really, really, really excited to be back at school and to see you as teachers and to see their friends and to be in their school space. And so they might be in a different space. So knowing that we're going to have a little bit of this uncertainty with our students, we can think about, well, how can we practice that individual and group self-care in order to handle all of these different experiences that may come alongside this different type of school year. So some self-care strategies that we might think about when we're implementing our self-care practices, first and foremost, like I mentioned before, is the oxygen mask rule. So if you've been on an airplane or heard about this rule, the idea is that if for whatever reason there's an emergency with the airplane, you put your oxygen mask on first before you go around and help others. And we want to think about this in terms of our self-care as well. And this, I think, personally, I know this experience is really challenging for me as well, and especially for folks who are caregivers and work in that caring space, is that often when we're taking care of other people, we are the last person that we think of to take care of. However, we kind of want to begin to change this perspective a little bit and think about it the opposite way, and know that the more times that we're able to help ourselves, that helps to provide energy, it helps boost our emotional, mental, and physical well-being, and that in turn allows us to help others as well. Like we mentioned before, we want to build upon our current strengths, and we talked about that a little bit previously. And we can also think about this in a multi-tiered kind of way. So thinking about how can you help the teachers in your grade level or other folks in your school, maybe thinking about how this applies to your classroom. We also want to think about committing to self-care with some flexibility, and that definitely sounds kind of a little bit opposite. But what this means is we really want to think about how we can commit to self-care in as much as possible a daily way. So we want to see if we can provide that type of self-care and also recognize that if we're not able to get to that self-care for us in that day, in that moment, that's okay too. We don't necessarily want to have self-care become another thing that we have to check off on our to-do list, but really be something that's helpful and restorative. So also recognize that there are going to be those days that are super busy. And if for whatever reason you can't get to your self-care practice, that is totally, totally understandable and okay too. Speaking of those different self-care practices, we want to think about starting small and that it doesn't have to be glamorous. So we often think about a self-care practice as going on vacation, or going to a yoga class, or taking a big retreat, or going to the spa. But our self-care can also look like setting boundaries for ourselves. It can look like getting all the loads of laundry done that we needed to, or cleaning our desk. So we can kind of rethink what this is going to look like. And to our next point, one size isn't going to fit all. So someone's self-care strategy for one person might look really different than another person. And this can be really great because you can try on different self-care practices or strategies that work for each of you. And then if you can find and kind of tailor to the unique needs that you're looking for in your practice. And then lastly, we can think of this as a journey and not a destination. Sometimes I notice in myself that if I'm practicing self-care for a while, all of a sudden I'm noticing I'm feeling a little bit better, and then I think, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. So it's a constant reminding that this is a practice that we can continue doing, knowing it's going to change and ebb and flow with the changes in our lives, and it's something we can always come back to. So something that we might do to get started, if you're kind of wondering about what some things might be helpful specifically to you, is you can go onto this link here. This is a mindful self-care scale by Catherine Cook-Catone. And there's 33 items, so there's 33 questions. For me, it maybe took about 5 minutes to complete. And what it does is you get 6 self-care domains, and they're in mindful relaxation, physical care, self-compassion and purpose, supportive relationships, supportive structure, and mindful awareness. And I personally took this a couple weeks ago, and I can just show you, I did some screen grabs of what the results look like, so you can email the results to yourself. And so you can see, like for overall self-care, at the time I had moderate, and then it breaks it down into these different domains. So at the time, again, I was low in my physical self-care, and then they give some suggestions, so you can see there's water, nutrition, exercise. In my supportive relationships, I was high, which was really lovely. And then here for mindful self-awareness, that was moderate. Again, I got some suggestions specific to mindful self-awareness. And then they also share some different apps and links that can be helpful as well. So I'll definitely share the slide and the links for all of you if you'd like to just kind of see where you're at with your own self-care practice. And it's kind of a fun place to start. And so just to kind of end our talk together, I figured it was important to model self-care. So we're just going to do a really quick, like 2 or so minute mindfulness practice. This I'll also share with you all, and I'll share my notes as well that I've compiled if that's helpful as a resource. And what this is a 3-minute breathing space. So if you would like to participate, you are welcome to. If you want to mute me and like go to the bathroom, you can do that as well. That is a completely wonderful like self-care practice, listening to your needs. So if you would like to join in, you can just, sit in a comfy seat, maybe sit up a little bit taller. If you would like to close your eyes, you're welcome to close your eyes, or you can just gaze down towards your desk or your keyboard. Let your hands rest somewhere in your lap or by your sides. Then you might begin to just notice your breath. We can start off by just asking yourself, how are you feeling right now? Noticing what feelings you're having, your thoughts, or any sensations. Maybe even give words and phrases to those emotions or feelings. You can begin to shift that awareness to your breath. Maybe noticing your breath, breathing in and breathing out through your nose. You might notice that the breath feels a little bit cooler when you breathe in. Noticing the temperature of the room. And a bit warmer as you breathe out. Noticing the temperature of your body. You can begin to expand your attention outward to the body itself. Noticing the weight of your body resting in your chair or your seat. And if any muscles are holding on or tensing, if it feels better, you're welcome to soften. And then when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can slowly begin to blink them open. And rest. So even just doing something by noticing how you're feeling, your breath and your body can be a really nice self-care check-in. And similar to Sarah, here are a few additional resources if you would like to look a little bit further into self-care for yourself and at school. And with that, we can wrap up. And if anyone has any additional questions or thoughts, I am happy to answer them. So thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Sarah. At this time, I'm gonna go back to my screen. Let's see if I can do that. All right. Thank you again, Sarah and Brooke from Shanthi for sharing all of that wonderful information. And I want to thank the attendees at this time. All 88 of you, I am thrilled. Between the two sessions, we had over 120 teachers participating. It is so important that all of you find some time this summer to take care of yourself first and foremost, so you can take care of your students, your family, and everyone else around you. I know you're all being pulled in 10 million different directions like we all are right now. So please carve out some time to practice some of the things that Sarah and Brooke talked about. And we will make the slideshows available to you. If not tonight, I'll get those to you tomorrow. I think Mark James has all of your emails that we can get that out to you. I see a few chats. If just a lot of thank you, you're very welcome. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me, and Sarah and Brooke's emails are also, I think, on the slideshow presentations, and you can reach out to them as well. They're certainly the experts. And for those of you who have schools you would like to connect with Shanthi, you can reach out to Sarah and Brooke as well about those opportunities moving into next year. Whether we're brick and mortar school or remote, this is something that we all can still practice with our students. So thank you once again. I have a few surveys going out. There's one that you should be receiving from your building administrator shortly. And also specific to this particular session from Shanthi, they've generously offered an Amazon gift card. You'll be entered to win an Amazon gift card if you complete the survey to give them some feedback. So thank you once again. Thank you for letting us record this session so we can share this with your colleagues. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.